the self. So it's meditation on the self for the purpose of self-realization. So this is the traditional practice of meditating on the self. For example, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras would teach us yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, meditation, and then samyama to realize the individual self. So it's a withdrawing from the world and meditating on the inner consciousness of our own being. Shiva Vyapti. Shiva is the designation for universal consciousness. So it's going beyond the awareness of the individual self to an awareness of the self in the world. Traditionally, yogis might go meditate in a cave for so many years and recognize their own inner being. Shaivism says that's not enough. We need to take what we've learned in meditation and see that same consciousness in the world, to apply it in our daily lives, to see consciousness in every person that we meet, in every situation is in life. One of the sutras in Shaivism says, "Na shivam vidyate kvachit," that there's nothing that exists that's not Shiva. We begin to see consciousness in everything. So the path of traditional Vedanta would be neti neti. I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not my thoughts, I'm pure consciousness. Once I recognize that consciousness, that's Atma Vyapti. We become Jivan Mukta. We're no longer required to transmigrate and take a physical form. Once we realize our own consciousness, then we have the experience that everything arises from that consciousness. So all of my feelings, all of my thoughts, all of my actions are an expression of that consciousness and not different from consciousness. So during sadhana, we can take the neti neti approach, that I'm not my body, I'm not my thoughts, the world isn't real, I'm the self. But once we realize the self, then we realize that everything is consciousness. There's nothing that exists that's not consciousness. And that's a fundamentally different awareness. Instead of withdrawing from the world, seeing it as Maya, something separate from our own being, we realize that we're Shiva. That each of us creates our own reality. Each of us, out of our own consciousness, expresses our own being in the world. In fact, everything is consciousness. So Atma Vyapti would be the attainment, the recognition, the realization of the self. I'm pure consciousness. I am that. Self-realization, Jivan Mukta, different names describe this. Moksha, that's the description of it. And that's the traditional description of moksha, of self-realization. Shaivism adds on top of that, bringing that awareness into the workplace, into your family life, and seeing everything as consciousness. So Atma Vyapti is a very high state. It's a recognition, I am that. The individual soul, the Purusha, the individual Atma, is none other than Shiva. Then from that realization, we continue to do our sadhana and recognize that Shiva has its own Shakti, and it's Shakti that manifests this universe. So we're able to see Shakti in every action, in every breath. And it's a fundamentally different approach to sadhana. Instead of withdrawing from the world saying, neti neti, I'm not this, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, we begin to recognize, my thoughts are a manifestation of my own consciousness. So we think pure thoughts. We see God in everyone and in everything, and no longer need to renounce anything. Tattvamasi says, thou art that.
Yeah.
And it's a Mahavakya that's given from a guru to disciple. to recognize, and it can happen in an instant. Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, these are all designations. These are Mahavakyas that are meant to elevate us. These are divine statements that can transmit the direct experience that I am that. The next stage of awareness is to recognize that everyone and everything is that same consciousness and not separate. So we no longer see faults in other people. We no longer have judgments about them. We see everything as the play of consciousness, as the lila, the play of consciousness itself. What is the self? Well, the yogis who've realized the self have said, it's beyond words. It can't be described. But we as human beings try to describe it. There's a word in the Shaivis tradition called anuttara, which is beyond the beyond. So beyond what the mind can conceive is that. You know, it's the source of all of creation. It's tough for the human mind to conceive that from the unmanifest came the manifest, and that this manifest is an expression of unlimited potential, that everything that exists, the totality of all that exists, is consciousness, and this we designate as Shiva. Now, how that manifests in an individual being as consciousness itself, as pure being, as awareness of being. We use different terms to describe it. Shiva, pure being. Shakti, the awareness of that being. Shaivism posits that Shiva is prakasha. It's pure light, the light from which everything is manifested. It's also vimarsha, which is the self-awareness of that life. So these two are inseparable. Being and awareness of being. And the nature of this awareness is love, is joy, ananda. All the things that we cherish and value and delight in fit under the term ananda. And this is who we are. Once we let go of our false identification, the traditions tell us that we identify ourselves with the physical body. I'm Swami Brahamananda. I have this physical body, but the problem with that is that the body suffers old age, sickness, and death. So I don't want that. That's not who I really am. There's something beyond that, beyond the mind even, beyond the emotions, beyond the feeling. There's an unchanging awareness, a consciousness that's aware of itself. And the nature of that awareness is supreme joy. And the traditions tell us that's who we really are. We're not the body, we're not the mind, we're not our belief systems or our thoughts. We're none of those things. We tend to identify with that. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm successful, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I identify with my bank account, and those cause contractions, cause limitations. We become subject to desires and attachment and aversion. And this is what causes us to suffer, this wrong identification. Shaivism teaches us the way out of that is to recognize who we are. And we can do sadhana, meditation, and various practices to recognize that, or we can recognize it in an instant. That's why these Mahavakyas have been given to us, the great statements, Tattvamasi. When we're ready, we can have an awareness, I'm that. I'm pure consciousness. Aham Brahmasmi. I'm Brahman. I had that experience with my own guru when I took sannyas. It was a 7-day ceremony where we fasted and did all-night rituals and didn't sleep. And at the end of 7 days, we took a dip in the sacred river. renounced everything. We're naked in the water. And when we came back, my guru invited us to his room, where he put a cloth over our head, a shawl, and he whispered in my ear, "Aham Brahmasmi. Aham Brahmasmi." He said, "This isn't a mantra. This is an awareness that's symbolized by the word Aham Brahmasmi." He said, "Whenever you forget who you are, just remember Aham Brahmasmi, and you'll remember, I am that. I am that." I have a theory about that. People being awakened, being enlightened, being self-realized, it's very popular these days. There are many people that claim to have attained that. I think of it as stages of development. You know, I particularly like the concept in Western psychology of stages of development. You know, in the same way we go from being a child to a teenager to an adult, you know, and then there are various stages of development all the way up to Shiva. And every time we have a movement from one stage of development to the next, it's an awakening. It's a radical shift in our values and our level of perception. I'll give you an example. When I was raised Catholic, Christian, conservative, Republican, and I went to the university. And while I was there was a radical shift in what I believed in, and I thought. I began to see the world in a very different ways. I was moving from a kind of traditional conservative value to what we would call modern values, rational thought. And that was a sort of an awakening. Some people in today's culture might call me woke. That's kind of the big word these days, that I became woke. You know, my values began to change. But my growth didn't stop there. You know, once I learned to meditate, then I went through various stages of development. For example, I'll give you an example. When I first met Muktananda, I would attend his lectures. He had satsang every night. And one night he would say, "The world is an illusion. Renounce the world. Peace follows renunciation. Meditate on the self. You are that." Right? Give the traditional Vedantic teachings. In fact, I was so inspired after one of his talks one day, I decided to renounce the world. Believe it, I was 25 years old, and so I gave away my possessions. I only had some very little clothing. I went out, I had a long beard, long hair. I shaved everything. And I was very proud of myself. I had renounced the world, right? So the next day, I went for darshan, you know, and all these people were coming up to Mukta. I had my hair in a brown bag, you know, and I was going to offer it to him. So I came up and I had a brown bag, and Bob was looking at me eagerly. "What's in the bag? What's in the bag?" And I handed it to him. I said, "Baba, I've renounced the world." Very proudly. I was so proud. I renounced the world. So I gave him this bag, and he opened up. He went, "Oh, God, that's disgusting." You know, he says, "Don't renounce the world. Just renounce your ego." And then he said to me, take that hair and go down to the ocean, toss it in the water. Really renounce your ego. Let it go. So I did. I took this big wad of hair and took it down to the local bay and threw it into the water. But it wouldn't sink. It kept bouncing back to the top. So I took a big rock and I smashed it, hoping it would sink and that I'd be rid of my ego once and for all, right? I'd renounce. But it bobbed right back up. So I spent the next hour trying to sink, you know, and it's been a great analogy because the ego keeps popping back up. So I realized it wasn't about renouncing the world. You know, so Baba would say the Vedantic approach, renounce the world, realize the self. But then the next day, he would say, everything is consciousness. Everything is divine. See God in everyone and everything. And I would be so confused. Which is it? Is it the world an illusion, or is it all consciousness? So you go through various stages. I went through a very Vedantic stage. I became a Swami. I renounced the world. I gave up my possessions and my wealth, and went through the stage of neti. I'm not the body, I'm not my mind. In the sannyas ceremony, we even performed our own fire ritual, our funeral ritual. But there's stages beyond that. So once I sort of realized that I'm the self, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, that became the next stage of development. The next awareness was, if I'm the self, then it must be true that everyone is the self. So I began to do practices to realize God dwells within everyone, that I'm not special, I'm not unique, that God dwells within you, and God dwells within you, and consciousness dwells within me. So to get back to your question, people have an awakening at any of these, over all the different levels in between, but at any one of these levels, the awakening is so radical that we get such a radically different perspective. We have totally different values that can feel like the final result. You know, we asked my Baba towards the end of his life, what's it like to be self-realized? And he said, you know, there's no ending point to it. He said, it gets deeper and deeper every day. Once you recognize the self, there are infinite dimensions that you can begin to explore. We begin to expand our capacity to hold love. We can hold a room full of love. We can love our family, we can love our friends, we can love our country, we can love all of humanity, and there's no end to it. So I've taken that as a model of understanding that we each awaken in degrees, and there's always more, always more. Until we become absolutely one with Shiva, and by Shiva I mean universal consciousness. The totality of all consciousness is universal consciousness, the one mind from which contains all knowledge of the past and the future, and all the principles of physics and biology and all the principles of the world, until we're able to actually manifest a universe completely, and then it's all, there's more. There's more. No limit. So the first stage is Atma Vyapti. We recognize the self, then we become Shiva Shakti, seeing consciousness in every particle of the universe.